We are continuing with our studies in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we are nearing the end of our study. We have been looking at Solomon's observations and comments on life, the ways that he tried to find happiness, the problems that he saw with living life here on earth, something which is temporary, something which is not always fair. And in the last two, or today and also last time, we're turning to some of Solomon's final words of counsel about how we should live. What is the wise way to live in light of what we have discovered about the nature of life and the way things are here? And so this morning, I'd like to look at chapter 11. And in this chapter, there are four themes that I'd like to touch on with you today. And the first is related to the first couple of verses of chapter 11. So I'd like to read those first and then discuss with you some of the message that we can take from Solomon's comments. So looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, that's on page 654 in our English Bibles. Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. Give portions to 7, yes to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. How many of you have heard this expression before, cast your bread upon the waters? That's a pretty famous phrase from Ecclesiastes. And sometimes we think about that, but what does Solomon really mean by this expression? What does it mean to cast your bread upon the waters? What are the implications of this suggestion or counsel? And at first glance, when we first consider what Solomon says, casting your bread upon the waters appears to be kind of foolish or wasteful. I mean, what happens when you throw bread onto the water? The fish eat it, okay? Or the ducks. Sometimes we go to the park and people are feeding the ducks or feeding the fish. In Japan, you have carp. At some parks, they have these carp ponds, and you throw something in there and the carp just come up quickly and grab that food. When you cast bread upon the water, it doesn't last very long, right? Bread dissolves, it gets soggy, it breaks up, it disappears. And at first glance, the idea of casting your bread upon the waters seems to be wasteful. It's throwing away something useful, something that you could get benefit from, and there doesn't seem to be any reward or any potential return for that action. It seems to be kind of foolish. And of course, this is in keeping with a theme we find throughout the Bible. Again and again in the Bible, God uses logic which seems really strange or crazy to us. We have many stories where God told people to do things that seemed really stupid. Name it. Oh, go wash in the river 7 times and you'll be clean of leprosy. Gideon, oh yeah, take 300 men and attack these thousands of Midianites. The children of Israel, oh yeah, camp by the Red Sea. There's no way across and the Egyptians might catch you, but yeah, just make camp here. It's a good place. When we think about these situations from a human perspective, from a secular, worldly point of view, this counsel and those suggestions seem crazy, suicidal, and foolish. And casting your bread upon the waters, it seems to be foolish to us when we hear this advice. Now, a second kind of negative thing about casting your bread upon the waters, it seems to be kind of risky. One meaning of casting your bread upon the waters we interpret as to invest or to prepare for the future. And yet, the waters or the sea is not the safest place to venture. And in the Bible, most of the stories about the ocean are not really positive ones. We have people like Jonah. You know, he tried to escape from God, and the storm came up, and he was thrown overboard. He ended up in a whale. We have Jesus and his disciples on the Sea of Galilee, and what happened? You know, several times storms came up, and they were in danger. The voyages of Apostle Paul in the New Testament, many times we read about his accounts of his travel, and he talks about, I was shipwrecked so many times, and in his final voyage, he and his companions were driven by storm for many weeks before they reached safety. Using the sea or the ocean is a very risky thing. It doesn't seem like the safest way to invest your resources by sea travel and sea ventures. Even today, sea travel can be dangerous. In some areas of the world, there are problems with pirates and piracy around the Cape of Africa, Somalia. There are a lot of pirates that attack and raid even large tankers, taking people kidnapped for ransom and holding the cargo. Sometimes people lose their lives. Sea travel and sea voyages are not without risk. It doesn't seem like the safest kind of investment to make. And another drawback to throwing your bread upon the waters at first glance is that you're going to be without for a while. That resource that you're casting away, you're not going to be able to use. And even though there's a promise that you will get a return, you're going to have to wait. How many people like waiting? Anyone?
You learn to wait.
You learn to wait, yeah. That wasn't the question. Most people don't like waiting, right? It starts when we're really small. I can remember when I was a child, my brother and I would get in the car with my parents to go someplace, and what's the very famous line of children? Are we there yet? Yeah. 5 minutes. Are we there yet? How much longer? How much longer? And when you cast your bread upon the waters, we have the promise of reward, but you have to wait. We don't like waiting. And we don't know how long we will have to wait sometimes for that return and that reward to come. And by nature, that makes us uncomfortable. We like certainty. We like to know exactly when, where, how things will happen. We don't like unpredictability. We don't like not knowing when we will get our reward for our investment. But the very important point is that despite all of these seemingly negative and foolish things, a reward will come. God has promised that if we take this kind of action, if we are willing to put our trust in Him, if we are willing to invest, we will receive a reward. And when we talk about this casting of bread upon the waters, it doesn't always just mean a benefit for ourselves. Of course, personal investment, personal finance is important. Jesus told the parable about the servants who had money given them by the master. And they invested that money in different things to seek a return for the master. And as Christians, we are stewards. We are responsible for what God gives us. We need to use all of our resources, our time, our money, our skills, in the wisest way. We want to be able to show a positive return to our master when he comes. But another meaning of this kind of casting your bread upon the waters is the principle of generosity, of sharing with other people. People that may not be able to help us or give us any kind of reward for our efforts. And the Jewish society, their social system was based upon this principle of generosity. The restrictions on harvesting and gleaning were designed to help the poor, the widows, the orphans, so that they could survive based on the generosity, the kindness of the community. And as Christians, we have a responsibility, an obligation, a duty to be generous to others that are in need. Whether they are a friend, a neighbor, anyone that we can help, when we have the resources to, we have the obligation to help. The Jews, of course, argued about, who is my neighbor? Because the Old Testament command, love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, you all know the very famous story of the Good Samaritan. And the message of that parable was that your neighbor was anybody. Anybody that you met, any place, any time, that needed your help and needed your love, they are your neighbor. And, well, of course, we have the very famous passage found in Matthew chapter 25. If you'll turn there with me. It's one I'm sure you've read and heard many times. Matthew chapter 25, looking at verse 34 through 40. Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. That's on page 962. And in this passage, we have one of the very famous parables that Jesus talked about, talking about the judgment, the time of judgment. And he talked about the sheep and the goats, and how there would be a separation at the time of judgment. And in these verses, the king talks to two groups of people, right? The righteous, and then the wicked. And the righteous are surprised. Well, why are we being rewarded? And the king answers, well, I was hungry, I was thirsty. I was naked. And you helped me. You showed love to me. And the righteous are like, well, when, Lord? I don't remember meeting you. And of course, Jesus said, well, the poor, those who were in need, the people that you saw, that you helped, who maybe were strangers, you helped them. And by helping them, you helped me. And of course, to the wicked, the same. The wicked are like, well, when? We never saw you. You never came to my house. You never asked me for anything. How can you say we never helped you? And the same response. Well, there were people around you. People that you met, people that you saw, people that asked for help. And you ignored them. You rejected their requests. You turned them away. As you do to the least, you have done to me. Now, the principle here is that we are generous not because we expect a reward. We are generous because it is a symbol. It is a consequence. It is a result of our love for God.
Amen.
It's a demonstration by our daily works that we are people of love. A second theme that Solomon talks about in this chapter, chapter 11, is found in verses 3 through 6. And in these verses, Solomon talks about the unpredictability of life, how we don't always know, and we can't always be certain of what things will be. He talks about the wind and the weather, the falling of trees in the forest. These are things we don't know, we can't predict. And yet, we need to act. We cannot wait for everything to be perfect. We cannot simply put off taking action, hoping that the situation will improve tomorrow. We need to live diligently while we can. Of course, in Solomon's day, most people were farmers. And as a farmer, you had to sow your crops, prepare your fields, and as a farmer, you couldn't just keep putting off these actions. Even if the weather wasn't perfect, you needed to start working. Because if you did not, you would not be able to plant in time for the harvest to come at the right time and in the right season. And as Christians, we have to realize that today is the day of action. Paul, when he preached before the Roman governor and one of the Jewish kings and the queen, their response, "Oh, Paul, your message is powerful, but not today. Maybe another season, another time, we will become Christians." We need to live and act each day. We cannot let time slip by. None of us knows how much time we actually have in this world. We need to use each and every moment. Time is precious. And so we need to apply ourselves and do what we can, where we can, and when we can. Now, it may not be possible for us to do everything. And in fact, God does not call us to do everything. Jesus, as he talked with his disciples, he looked around and he used the example of the harvest. He said, the harvest is coming. And you will reap what you have not sown. In other words, the disciples didn't do all the work. Other people at different times had done things to prepare the way. But the disciples' task was to harvest. We are each called to act and to do something which is possible for us to do. God does not ask us to do the impossible. With His help, we can do anything. But we need to act in faith and in partnership and in harmony with Him. Also, in this passage, Solomon talks about doing different things. Diversifying your efforts. Do not focus completely on one task. By doing different actions, by taking different steps, you increase the odds of one of these steps succeeding. Thomas Edison, who's one of the most famous American inventors, most famously remembered for the light bulb, he said that invention was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It wasn't just the idea, but it was the work that went into the idea. And Thomas Edison did not focus on just one thing. The light bulb was only one invention that he created. There were many, many other things that he tried, and many of them failed. Many of them did not succeed. Many of them had to be discarded. But for each failure, he had many successes. Today, there are many people who don't want to take any risks. Well, it might fail, so I'll stay on this little path. But history teaches us that failures lead to success. That we learn from our mistakes and we build on those mistakes. And successful people have often had many failures in their lives. And the difference between them and less successful people is they don't give up. They persevere. They try again. They learn from their mistakes and improve. And that is what we as Christians are to do as well. We are going to make mistakes every day. None of us are perfect. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But we can't let our failures prevent us from striving and pushing on towards the mark, towards the goal. We cannot give up because of a failure. Satan tries to burden us down with the feeling of guilt and insufficiency. Saying, oh, look at your mistakes. Look at how you failed. You're never going to succeed. But we know that with God all things are possible. That with God's help we can overcome. And that God has not put any test before us which we cannot succeed at. We can pass every test. God does not give us a test which is too difficult for the level that we are at. God does not require the impossible of us. He only gives us that challenge which He knows we are capable of reaching with His help. And so we need to reach out and make God our partner each day. We need to walk and work hand in hand with God so that we can overcome the trials, the temptations, and the challenges placed before us each day. And if we do that, we can overcome. In the final few verses of this chapter, Solomon focuses on the idea that life is fleeting, that life is short, and we need to enjoy and treasure life while we can. We must enjoy each day that God gives us. Sometimes people focus too much on the future and too little on today. It's like, oh, this is suffering. I hate life. But, when I retire, then I can relax. Then life will be good. You know what the problem is? If you don't learn to enjoy life each day, you're not going to enjoy life when you retire. History is filled of retired people who reach that age and it's like, hey, now what? What am I going to do now? What do I do with my time? And what is life? We need to enjoy life each day. God wants us to enjoy life each day. God gives us blessings. He surrounds us with things that we can enjoy each day. But we need to look and stop and reflect on those blessings. We need to realize that God will provide all of our needs. And what we have is sufficient. If we need more, God will give it to us. Enjoy life while you can, because you don't know how many days you have. Solomon says, enjoy your youth while you can, because when it's gone, life gets a lot harder. Now, I think that you are only as old or as young as you feel. I've met many old people that were very young at heart, who had a lot of energy, sometimes more energy than people a quarter of their age. When I was in university, I went on a backpacking trip with the biology department. I was not a biology major, but several of my friends were. They said, oh, come and join this trip, you can get college credit. I said, oh, I like backpacking, sure. So I went on this trip, and one of the amazing things about it was one of the professors. This guy, he was about maybe 72 or 73 years old. Bald, white-haired. He was a big guy, and he looked like he was in pretty good shape, but he always kind of moved around rather slowly. And so when we got to the place we were going to go camping, to the base where we parked our cars, people had to get their packs and all their gear, and he started loading up. And I was like, my goodness, he had this huge pack. It was bigger than mine. And then he had these two big plastic buckets. Each bucket looked like it was probably about maybe
40 pounds.
Oh, it was maybe like a 4 or 5 liter bucket. He had these two big plastic buckets. And each bucket he loaded up with stuff. So he's like a pack mule. He had these two big buckets and this big pack. And he told us, oh, go ahead, because I'm going to go slower. And so all the young college students all went trucking off down the path. And of course, you know what happened, right? After 2 or 3 hours, he slowly came along and just passed all of these college students who were like... It was amazing. He just slowly grinded his way up the mountain, and he reached camp before about half of his class, who were 20 years old when he was like 70. He made a lot of us look pretty foolish because of his power, his energy, and his perseverance. Simply because you're old doesn't mean that you can't be young at heart. And just because you are young doesn't mean you are necessarily young at heart. Sometimes young people are very pessimistic and fatalistic and have no dreams or goals. In Japan, a large percentage of young people are what we call NEETs, not in education, employment, or training. They're people that have just kind of given up on life. They sit at home, watch TV, play video games, listen to music, and do nothing. And, Japan is going to be in a difficult situation if this part of the population continues to increase. There are many people in Japan who don't seem to have any positive view about life and about the future. Japan's population is getting older, it's getting smaller. Japan has a lot of economic problems. Many people worry about what will happen in the future. And as Christians, we have a message for these people. One of hope, one of a positive outlook on life today, tomorrow, and forever. And as Christians, we need to cherish this message in our own hearts and in our own lives each day. And we need to also remember to share this message with other people. If we aren't positive and happy, if we are negative and pessimistic, people are not going to look at us in a positive way. How many of you like to be around negative people? Anyone? Do you like to be around people who are always frowning and complaining and fatalistic? No. We like to be around positive people. We like to be around people who are warm, friendly, caring, outreaching. And we need to be this way. We need to be positive. We need to be warm. We need to be caring. We need to be loving. And if we are that way and we are sharing this kind of message with other people, they will be attracted. And they will want to know why we are different and why we are the way we are. And so in closing, I would like to say, remember what God has given us. And share what God has given you with others each day. Thank you.
And